I was one of the Native American children, adopted at birth and removed from our country's Indian reservation system. I was raised in a small middle-class farming community, but was never told of my true American Indian heritage. It was still taboo back in those early days. The years passed, and in 1987 I lost both parents. While going through their personal belongings, my wife discovered my adoption papers and she began a search. 5 years later, I was reunited with my biological Lakota family, living on the Lower Brule Sioux Indian Reservation of South Dakota. I am a son of two mothers and a product of two worlds that had collided, but I have an equal amount of love and pride for both. I'm Paul LaRoche, and the stories you are about to see are an attempt to share this true American story of a hidden heritage. Hello, I'm Paul LaRoche. Most of you know me as the host of the weekly television show here on RFD-TV called Hidden Heritage. My family and I also perform with the contemporary Native American musical group called Brule. Our most recent stop has been in Branson, Missouri at the RFD-TV Theater. But I'm here today to share with you a unique behind-the-scenes look at a brand new show that we're producing called One Nation, the Tribes of North America. The idea for One Nation came from our recent participation in the annual New Year's Day celebration in Pasadena, California, better known as the Tournament of Roses Parade. It was the vision of RFD-TV founder and president Patrick Gotch to build a float dedicated to the Native American tribes of North America. The project was a full year in the making and culminated with a 3-hour trip down Pasadena Boulevard on New Year's Day of 2011. Proudly proclaiming to some 30 million viewers around the world that Native America is still here and the American Indian is still standing. Months later, after the excitement of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity faded, we were left wondering what kind of impression we had made, if any, as to the current state of Native America. It's one thing to show the world that we are still here, but yet another to give the world a rare snapshot of who we are today. I know firsthand from our many travels across the country with our group Brule that there are many misconceptions and romanticized perceptions of today's American Indian tribes. First of all, people don't realize that there are over 550 recognized tribes in North America, each having their own native traditions and unique tribal history. There are some common threads that weave between the tribes, but there are more differences than most imagine. Then it occurred to us, having opened the doors to Native America with the One Nation float in the Tournament of Roses Parade, why not invite the world to join us as we examine and explore Native America tribe by tribe? A contemporary chronicle of who and what Native America is today, a living history and documentation of the current state of Native America. The idea was too exciting and timely to pass up. The thought of exploring the entire universe of Native America became more than a project. It became a mission. Upon closer examination, it seemed that nothing of the sort existed. There were a scattering of individual tribal mini-documentaries and a lot of major documentaries, mostly dealing with cultural trauma and genocidal events of the past. The kind of documentaries that draw empathy from the world at large, but fall short on the true representation of who we are today. So there it was. Our mission had been etched out in stone. Through a series of events that one could never have charted out, we would attempt to catalog and chronicle the current state of Native America, including an inside look at all 550 recognized tribes, their individual bands, economy, history, leadership, education, cultural preservation, arts, and communities. We would call this series One Nation. There are 562 federally recognized nations. They are called tribes, bands, pueblos, communities, rancheras, and native villages. Approximately 229 of these nations are located in the state of Alaska. The rest are located in 33 various other states. The United States Constitution recognizes that Indian nations are sovereign governments, just like Canada and California. The Supreme Court, Congress, U.S. presidents, and hundreds of treaties have repeatedly reaffirmed that Indian nations retain their inherent power of self-government. Treaties and laws have created a fundamental contract between Indian nations and the United States. Indian nations ceded millions of acres of land that made the United States what it is today, and in return received, among other guarantees, the right of continued self-government on their own lands. Tribal self-government serves the same purpose today as it always has. It ensures that Indian nations remain viable as distinct groups of people. Tribal cultures enrich American life, and tribal economies provide opportunities where few would otherwise exist. Tribal governments also provide basic infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and public buildings, as well as a broad range of governmental services on tribal lands, including education, law enforcement, judicial systems, and environmental protection. The status of American Indian and Alaskan Native tribal governments lies at the heart of nearly every issue that touches Indian country. Self-government is essential if tribal communities are to continue to protect their unique cultures and identities. Unfortunately, too few people in the United States today are aware of the history of U.S. tribal relations and the purpose and historical context for tribal self-government. It is the hope of our program, One Nation, to provide a basic overview of the history and underlying principles of tribal government, as well as basic information about tribes today, to ensure that decision-makers and members of the public at large have the information necessary to understand and engage effectively with contemporary Indian nations. The United States Constitution recognizes that Indian nations are sovereign governments. One Nation, the tribes of North America, was becoming a reality. But a lot of things needed to be done before such an event like this could happen. We would need a team to film, edit, and script out the project. As fate would have it, we had some experience and background with past projects including Hidden Heritage on RFD-TV, the making of Brûlé live at Mount Rushmore, a once-in-a-lifetime concert that was filmed in the year 2007, and various little mini documentaries around the life and times of Brûlé. The team at present seemed to consist of just a handful of us that had the heart and the desire to make such a project happen. I rely quite a bit on my son Shane, who has been the cameraman for the Hidden Heritage series. Not only has been the cameraman, but he's also had an extreme interest in our family's background and has gone through the assimilation process with my wife and I as we returned back into Native America. So he's had a unique perspective on the culture that many don't have. In any event, Shane has been the perfect cameraman with the right heart. My cousin Chris Estes was born and raised on the Lower Brule Sioux Indian Reservation of South Dakota. He carries the traditional ways, he's a powwow dancer, and knows the culture in a different capacity than I could ever hope to. So for the time being, he's become our cultural advisor and expert on tribal activities. Garen Coons is a member of the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska and represents the Lakota and the Dene nations. He's an excellent young candidate, and in many ways I feel that he is a role model for our youth and a fine example of someone who also carries the traditional ways. He's on board not only as a camera person, interviewer, editor, and scriptwriter, but also as someone who has a vast understanding of the Native American culture. And last but not least, my beautiful wife, Kathy, will be on board to take care of the administration duties and take care of some of the business behind such an operation. So with this team set in place, we're ready to begin our journey into One Nation. I was one of the Native American children who was adopted at birth and removed from our country's reservation system. As fate would have it, I wound up in the loving care of two very beautiful and wonderful parents, and I grew up as part of a small white middle-class farming community in southwest Minnesota. This is my story. My brother and I grew up without the knowledge of our heritage. Well, you see, we were told that we were adopted. Both of us knew that as young boys. But the strange little twist in our story is that we were never really told that we were Native American. And I think there was a reason for that. See, back in those days, it was still taboo to openly proclaim that you had Native American descent or lineage in your family tree. And that's all changed these days. But I believe, thinking back on it, I think our parents did that as kind of a protective device. There wasn't such a thing as cultural diversity back at that time. And so, you know, perhaps the information that we were the only 2 Native American children in that town, it may have been damaging information. I believe that our parents gave us that information out of love. They just left out the little part that we were Native American and told us that we were French Canadian, which in fact was partially correct. Well, I discovered at an early age that I had a love for music, and so it became my passion quite young. I remember one day my dad came home, and I was probably about 7 or 8, and he walked in the house and he had a box, and the box was what I thought was kind of a strange contraption. Anyway, it was an accordion. One evening I received a phone call, out of the blue you might say, and on the other end of the line was a gentleman who introduced himself as my biological brother. His first words to me were, "Hey bro, you are Lakota." You see, neither of us had known that the other had existed all those years. And so we had a long conversation and exchanged our life stories. It certainly would have been different had I remained on the reservation. Well, at the end of the conversation, he said something that really forever changed the course of our lives. He said, "Come on home."
As I recall, after we had had our reunion with Paul's family in the fall of 1993, they encouraged him to get back into music and to write from his heart. I then found a Native American newspaper, Indian Country Today, and in there was a story about a Native American record company. And then when Paul returned in January that following year with the first recording of We the People, after we listened to it, and I knew deep down that we needed to move back to the reservation to start all over and figure out a way to get this music out into the world.
Well, when we finally got to Deadwood, we were still pretty green at the art show circuit, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what our schedule would be. What we ended up doing was really performing every day. We had an idea that we would just perform until it rained, but it never really rained the summer that we started out, and we went for, over 30 days straight. But it taught us a lot. It taught us how to work hard, and we disciplined ourselves to be consistent. And it wasn't long before we found out that there was really something unusual to what was happening.
On a recent concert stop in Pierre, South Dakota, we couldn't believe it when some of the nuns from St. Mary's Hospital actually showed up to the show. Several of them remembered when Paul was born, and it just touched my heart when they talked about Paul's mom, Arlene, and how painful it was for her to leave him behind. They said there was sadness in her eyes as she wrote his name on the birth certificate, a name she chose with great care. Her name was Arlene, and she named Paul Arlen, and it was actually Arlen Faye LaRoche. She evidently wanted to make sure that if Paul were to ever find his way home, that he would make a connection between him and her. And we figured out that she had just dropped the E off of Arlene, and that became Arlen.
My desire to embrace my Lakota culture, a culture that was removed at birth, is tenfold over any interest I may have had if I had remained on the reservation. This realization comes through observation. Going through a process of reverse assimilation causes one to not only explore the biological culture, but to reevaluate the adoptive culture as well, the one that I was raised in. In some ways, it provides a unique insight and perspective, certainly a road less traveled insofar as understanding the history the two cultures have shared, for better or for worse. At the same time, there is a desire to seek out that common ground where the two must stand together, survive in balance, and struggle to meet the demands that the future is sure to place upon the two. It is from this perspective, as a son of two mothers and fathers, and with the pride and love for both, that I will explore, question, study, and present the state of Native America. It is impossible to weave a concise and meaningful summary of the state of Native America today without losing a sense of the cultural richness and diversity that characterizes Indian country. The experiences, concerns, problems, and successes of tribes and individuals are as varied as the American Indian and Alaska Native people themselves. They are as different as the fisherman from a native village in Alaska, the Wall Street savvy Mohegan Tribal Council member, the Navajo code-talking veteran of World War II, or the hip-hopping Pima teenager skateboarding on the Gila River Reservation. Looking across the more than 550 tribes that comprise Indian country, one sees a picture of diversity, of societies and cultures, of governments and leadership, of organizations and activities, of socioeconomic status, and of trends and concerns. Nonetheless, there are identifiable common threads that tie America's 2.4 million Native Americans together. In the year 2011, American Indians face old challenges, armed with newfound strengths and new obstacles steeped in deep tradition. An example of this convergence of past and present concerns youth on the reservations, especially with respect to two major issues: education and crime. The need for adequate education continues to challenge tribes, but a recent economic resurgence in Indian country has given many tribes the wherewithal to begin to make up for federal shortfalls in curriculum development and school construction funds. Likewise, the youth population strains standard non-Indian approaches to gang violence, teen drug use, and youth crime. Tribes are tapping deep cultural connections to find solutions. Whether it is the union of Ho-Chunk elders and youth and mentoring programs, the restoration systems of justice for Navajo juveniles, or the training of Ojibwe teens to make music videos in their native tongue, tribes are finding that traditional, generational bonds form a strong foundation for facing today's issues. Those bonds of family and community shared history stretch back through centuries. They define what it is to be Indian in America today. They are the foundation on which Indian peoples now strive to define their own futures for themselves.
I think it made quite a big difference. The way I looked at it is that with all of us going and with all of us coming from different tribes and coming together, I don't think I realized such a big difference that it made until afterwards. I knew the importance of it, and I knew everything as far as everybody that was there, and as far as us as dancers, and as far as us as the group and the band and everything, we're around each other, natives getting together. But when all the other natives arrived, it was like a coming together. But even then, to me, it was just like, wow, this is like a dream. And I don't think the dream really, for me, came true until afterwards. For us as Navajo people, I think for me is that, first of all, being Navajo, I do have to introduce myself in the proper way. So because of my relatives that are listening out there. So, I just want to say, it's very important for me to introduce myself because, I have relatives out there, not only from the Navajo Nation, but clan-wise. And this was the proper way I was taught to introduce myself. Our background basically consists of silversmithing and artwork, sand painting, living among the red mesas. And, our main source of stock is sheep, and horses, livestock and horses. And, tourism has come to be really big. We are a sovereign nation. We have our own judicial system. We have our own government, and we have our own police force. Our tribe as is a lot of our people are, throughout the United States, throughout the world. And our people were among in the World War II that made a change in the code talkers and the language and everything. And code talkers were very, very important for us. And they're the ones that are our heroes in a lot of ways. And there are many celebrations that are held on behalf of them. Like even now, I think the change is very important in Hollywood. They're making a big difference in bringing real Native American actors into roles. I mean, although some of the roles are still not fully fulfilled by Native Americans, they are making a wake-up call to that. I think it's vitally important as far as the Natives stepping into the modern day as actors, as interviewers, as being in the media, cameramen, and everything. I do know that I find it very uplifting. I find it very important because it helps our younger generation to know that the goals that they have as being in the media, whatever it might be, in music, in television, in dance and in everything, that's what we represent. That's what we dreamed of. That's what we dreamed of as young kids. I mean, and know that our elders are important to us, and know that our songs are important to us, and know that our dance are important to us. And at the same time, we could stand in front of anybody in this world and share that.
Emmett E. Eastman Sr., that's my English name. My Dakota name is Tawakahediota, which translates his many lightnings. And I more or less adopted that name and went through ceremony so I could use it in, like, when I run, when I dance, and so forth. Well, I was born in December 24th, 1931, on the Siston-Wapton Indian Reservation, where I was born, and I resided the first 19 years of my life until I entered the service of our country. And then I came back for a few months, but I haven't really lived down there. But we have a homestead there. If I can go back to, we have land there, a lot of land, but home is where I hang my hat, more or less, where I move. And so I made many changes in my locations of my living quarters and stuff. But living with them, they never taught us the language. So I more or less went through, I was traditional on one side, on one hand, but then I was kind of American on the other hand. So I grew up that way, not really understanding the language, not learning the language, because my dad and mother and my grandmother spoke it fluently, but they never taught us the language because my father was a farmer in the township where I lived, Goodwill Township, and we lived among white farmers, and so they never taught us the language. Being they went to a boarding school, they were taught to not to speak the language. We had a lot of experience with horses, riding horses, driving horses, plug horses, and so we understood the horse, as being like sacred, like the dogs were called Shunka Waka because they were considered like a horse, and become a sacred dog, But being young like that and being a farmer, we stayed on the farm mostly. And we'd go into town, that's about the farthest we went. And that was 4.5 miles away, Sisseton. And I look back at that time, I'd get lonely over there, staying there too long, lonely for being back home. So I guess you get kind of like, what's the word, agoraphobic? You get used to being in one spot all the time. And so anything outside of that was kind of alien-like, And so it was always nice to get back to the farm also. But it is good to visit people, but to have visitors come also. So that meant a lot in our life too, our family life. The 4 directions, the 4 colors of the world, the 4 beats of a song, the verses, and the elements. And to me, the 4 elements have meant so much to me because I based my life on that. To start out with, fundamentally, my life, the heat that comes from the sun, the air from the wind, and the water. We need the water, and the earth itself. Along with that goes 7 principles. And we're born into that in a Dakota way. Knowledge, you learn knowledge through your dad and your mother and your siblings, your brothers and sisters. Then when you go to school, you grade school, elementary school, then high school, and college, and eventually whatever, master's degree, doctorate degree. So you learn knowledge that way. And then secondly, you learn respect. And respect is the second principle. And you learn that again from your parents and your grandmother, your siblings. And so respect is to respect not only your siblings and your parents and other people, but to respect the earth, respect the lightning, the thunder, everything that belongs to the weather, because it has a lot to do with Mother Earth or Grandmother Earth that it produces. And so it's important that we recognize that and honor that. And then the third one would be bravery and courage. And then the fourthly, it's humility. And to be humble, it's hard to be humble. But if you learn and follow these other principles, you can learn to be humble, and it's a virtue to be humble.
A moment of reflection causes one to think deeply about the resilience of the native people of North America. From the moment of European contact, their identity and survival have been under constant siege. Storms of oppression, racism, disease, and attempted extermination have blown over American Indians as fiercely as over any people in history. Yet, with the tenacity that breeds its own offspring in the face of odds so stacked against survival for the last 500 years, America's native peoples enter the 21st century. To be sure, strains on personal, family, and community identity and living conditions threaten to break Native America. But in the year 2011, the Indian voice is rising, its population is growing rapidly, its economic muscle is being flexed, and the winds of de-identification are being weathered. In Indian country today, it is now a time of proactive striving by Native Americans, individually and collectively, to establish their own fabrics of life by their own designs. One of the defining characteristics of Native America in the year 2011 is the drive for self-determination. Many non-Indian Americans have a vague awareness of Indian issues, like a conflict arising over the location of a new casino or an insulting school mascot that appears on the television. There is a general understanding of Native American history, starting with contact by the Europeans, followed by conflict with the governments of the European colonies, then followed by discrimination by disease and military engagement, the loss of land and the pushing of Indians onto reservations, and then finally contemporary problems such as poverty, may be now accompanied by questions about whether all Indians are getting rich on gambling or whether it's really Indian to run businesses and governments. Not only does such a simplified history fail to do justice to the experience of being Native American, it also misses the drive for self-determination that is at the core of Indian America today. Building a casino is not so much about money from gaming as it is about Indian tribes deciding for themselves what kind of economic activity they will pursue. Taking over the reservation schools is all about local control and local needs. Launching an all-Indian rock band is as much about saying for oneself what it means to be Indian as it is about making music. Fighting to protect and recover the artifacts and remains of tribal ancestors is a fight to tell a people's own story in the people's own way. The drive for self-determination by Native America in the year 2011 has its roots in the civil rights movement and political activism of particularly the 1960s. As with other ethnic and racial minorities, the push for civil rights grew out of a long history and decades of poverty and social disarray. The Native American case, however, took its own distinct turns, fueled by hundreds of years of treaties between the Indian nations and the United States government. While the resurgence of Native American people in the civil rights movement did not neglect the important work of personal strengthening, it has sought to achieve degrees of political separateness and self-rule. As one noted Native American scholar put it, Native peoples are nations, not minorities. To be Indian today is to be part of one's own community, and that community strives for self-determination. How many Indian tribes are there? There are 562 federally recognized Indian tribes, bands, nations, pueblos, rancheras, communities, and native villages in the United States. Approximately 229 of these are located in Alaska. The rest are located in 33 other states. Tribes are ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse. How many American Indians and Alaska Natives are there in the United States? According to the 2000 U.S. Census, approximately 4.1 million Americans self-identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, alone or in conjunction with another race. Why does the United States treat Indian tribal members differently from racial minority groups such as African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and others? American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians are members of the original indigenous tribes of the United States. They were considered sovereign nations from their first interaction with European settlers. Tribal governments have unique legal and political relationships with the federal government, which provides certain services to citizens of the tribes based on the political relationship, not because these citizens are a particular race or ethnicity. Tribal members are citizens of three sovereigns: their tribe, the state in which they reside, and the United States.
The One Nation float, to me, represented a lot, not only because, it was something that we all work for as dancers, as we're out there representing ourselves, our tribes, our family. And when the rendering came back about the One Nation float, I was floored. And then it made me feel good because it not only could make my family proud and stuff, but I could make the fancy dancers in general, what they work for. And I know that every time they go out there and dance, even myself, we always say a prayer and we always dance for those who can't. And so when that came about, I think it was out of this world, and I couldn't never imagine something like that. But it did happen, and the day that the float did come down the parade route, to see all the family back at home watching it on TV was a huge step to bring our contemporary Native American side. The fancy dancer is a contemporary Native American dance, and they could have had a traditional dancer up there and stuff, but we're moving into the right direction of the contemporary world, and people need to understand that there's the new side of Native Americans, that we're just not back in the Western days as Hollywood portrayed it and stuff, but we're coming together as a unified Native American culture. And not only do we have those cultural values, but we're also starting to incorporate new contemporary traditions. You look back maybe 100 years ago and stuff, my grandmother's age, she didn't have those opportunities and those kind of outlets to go to and to run to. They were hindered. She grew up in the boarding schools where they didn't allow you to talk your own language. So in today's society, we have opportunities. We live in a beautiful country, the United States of America, and I think we're moving the right direction. Even the tribes even though we're sovereign nations within the United States and stuff, we're working together and collaborating together and making us as culture, as a Native American people, self-sustaining. And that's the trick, but we do need to have education. and for those people that are out there, especially Native American youth that are watching, you always have to get your education. I was always told that education is power, knowledge is power. And that's the one thing that if we want to make it in today's society, in today's world, it's so fast-paced moving with the internet, with cell phones, with all this technology, we need to have that education. But case in point, my brother, he works in the language program called the Ho-Chunk Renaissance there in Winnebago, Nebraska, and he's using mainstream technology. He's using YouTube. He's using text messages to bring back the language of the Ho-Chunk people. And people are realizing what's on their cell phones and stuff, and to use that technology to keep the language alive. You know, a lot of our language is dying out. And once you lose a language, you lose all the songs, you lose all the stories, you lose a lot of, you basically lose the culture. And so I think that that's the kind of example that we're trying to make it in mainstream society today. My tribe is Oglala Lakota, as well as the Navajo Nation. I grew up on the Winnebago Indian Reservation for most of my life, and I know a lot of their songs, I know a lot of their language and culture, but my mother, she's Lakota, and she always taught me to go back to Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and make sure that you know your relatives. She always said, you got relatives out there that you don't know. So I always try to keep that in mind, and when I was growing up in high school and stuff, I grew up on the reservation, and then had the opportunity to receive a scholarship to go to a mainstream college called Wayne State College. And when I got to Wayne State College, out of 960 freshman students, there was only one Native American, so it was a culture shock for me. But it was a positive, and I think it developed of who I was today, that I need to go out there and share my culture, because so many people were coming to me and asking me about it. And if I didn't know, I would have to turn to my elders and go back home and ask them, because I don't want to give them the false information and stuff. But a lot of people had misconceptions and stereotypes about Native Americans, and they learned it from their parents, you know, and I had to come back and tell them that that's totally wrong. You know, one of the first day I was on the campus and stuff, they asked me if I still lived in a teepee. You know, but I said, no, we live in houses and things like that. But to get that education and to use it, it's a very important, especially in the state that Native Americans are in today.
In his younger days, he had taken part in the sweat lodge, and this has given him the concept. This is how he should walk. And he's been taking these, as he got older, he's been taking part in many of the ceremonies. And he's, at some point, he began to help the people. And also, when he was 26 years old, he started to Sundance. And from that point on, up to his present age of 70, he still continues to take part in the Sundance ceremony. And he tries to help people as much as he can. And this is how his lifestyle has been since he was at a young age. In years gone by, there were many elders that were very strong in their daily lives. And they did many things as elderly people to keep their families, their children healthy. And at some point, there was an illness that hit Indian people. The cancer, the dialysis, the diabetes. And what he had shared was that when he went up on Bear Butte, he had prayed for how it would be where the elders would live longer. And he had shared with us that way back in time, the elders would draw blood from themselves, and they would let the bad blood flow, and then at some point they would close it. And this is how the elders in past lived a long time. They lived a long, long time, 80, 90 years old. But today, we don't practice those ways anymore. We have directed our health to the non-Indian. So that's why we are losing many of our elderly people. And the young generation, for the younger generation to survive, they need to first come in contact with what they believe in, their spirituality. And if they practice that as they walk, then they would in turn be more healthier.
Indian country confronts two distinctly different problems when it comes to the media. For the national media, Native Americans face a press corps and an audience largely ignorant of the histories of tribes and thus of their unique political status and their relationship with the federal government. While the themes expressed in the national media have changed as federal policy has changed, evidence shows that the national media is more likely to misrepresent issues of importance to Native America. For example, describing Indians in accordance with majority group norms, conceiving of all tribes as similar despite varying cultural differences, and combining the examination of Native Americans with the moral judgments about them. What has historically been missing in the national news is the voice of the tribes themselves. Numerous studies have analyzed the portrayal of Indians in the national press, from images of savages to noble Indians of Western civilization, from victims of federal policy to culturally fashionable activists, from dependent, corrupt societies to wealthy political insiders. These studies show that non-Indians' portrayal of Native America has tended to reflect the views, norms, and desires of the majority, the non-Indigenous society. While the depiction of Native Americans has changed frequently with the swaying of tribal-federal relations, one constant has been the lack of Native American voice in the stories being told. When considering Native American arts and artists, most individuals and collectors regard historic or traditional arts and crafts as more authentic. However, contemporary Native American artists have become successful at producing and marketing a widening array of art forms. Whether historic or contemporary, the important point is that all of these arts and crafts are legitimately Indian. Two critical factors define the environment in which Native American artists work. First, the integrity and economic significance of Indian-made arts and crafts are being challenged, if not compromised, by imitations. Second, and more specific to contemporary Native Americans, is the challenge of being accepted by the larger art world and overcoming its misconceptions of what constitutes Indian art, rather than being relegated to categories such as folk or primitive art. The primary reason why Indian culture is difficult to discuss is that there is not just one Indian culture. American Indian is a single race category in the U.S. Census, but this grouping conceals the substantial cultural diversity found among Native communities. Members of the more than 500 federally recognized American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian communities can be as different from each other as citizens of Greece are from citizens of Vietnam. Citizens of the Navajo Nation have different worldviews and cultural practices from citizens of the Confederate Tribes of Oregon, and Lakota society differs greatly from that of the Osage of Oklahoma. When it comes to casinos and gaming, Most non-natives have the misconception that all tribes are benefiting from the huge incomes generated by tribal casinos. Recent figures provided by the National Indian Gaming Association shows that Indian gaming revenue was about $8.2 billion, or about 10% of the total gaming industry. 22 tribal operations account for about 60% of the total revenue. Prior to contact with European cultures, the Native American people on this continent had organized societies with their own traditional forms of medicine and healthcare. Health was considered, in general, to be a balance of body, mind, and spirit, and traditional Indian medicine addressed the whole person's health in its treatments and practices. Following contact with Europeans, the lifestyles and health status of American Indians and Alaska Natives has changed dramatically over the past 200 years. The Indian healthcare system is facing significant challenges as it tries to raise the health status of American Indians. Thank you for joining us at this behind-the-scenes look at the making of One Nation. We invite you to come along as we present a modern-day look at the tribes of North America, One Nation.